Maiga Van and Melonin, and well met indeed. I'm Arakia Galadirthan, and welcome back to the channel as we continue talking about Rings of Power. This is episode number 2, covering episode number 3 of the show. And as you can see, we recorded it immediately after the last one, so that just confirms that theory if you had that in your mind. And the aim is to discuss the show without condemning it or praising it, and really rather just trying to fill in some of the holes that maybe are left, some of the questions you might have, and try and talk about the lore, what really happened. Something I didn't mention in the last episode, but this episode may contain possible spoilers because sometimes I'll talk about things that happen in the books that the show might then cover. So if you don't know about the stories, you might not want to watch. But if you have some questions about episode 3 generally, then hopefully we'll be able to answer them. And Jess, again, has dutifully compiled some questions that she's going to ask about episode number 3. Isn't that correct, Jessica?
It is. Again, a lot of this is going to be based on the lore, and so some of it will contain spoilers. But again, I'll try and put a flag if we think there might be a spoiler or we're speculating on something that might happen, so you could potentially skip it. I don't know. That depends on my editing skills, as it's me doing the editing for these. So we'll see. So,
yep, fire away.
My first question was about Numenor. So we see Numenor in this episode, which is really, really exciting. I know nothing about Numenor, and I realise that we're going to learn more about it. But I was just wondering, would you be able to give a history of Numenor just in a nutshell? I'm not asking you to go through literally everything, but obviously it's just a new land, loads of new people that we're going to meet.
Yeah, so the show I don't think is going to give you Numenor's backstory, because in episode 3, Halbrand asks Galadriel, where are we, what is this, what's going on? And in the space of about 30 seconds, she covers basically all of Numenor's history. And again, because they don't have the rights to the Silmarillion, to Unfinished Tales, where most of Numenor's history is contained, I don't think we're going to learn anything about it. So briefly, in the very first age, as I mentioned in the previous episode of this podcast, the humans were broken down into different houses, and some of them fought with the elves and one of them fought against the elves. Well, the humans that fought with the elves were rewarded for their service, and they were given the land of Elena, which is the island's name, and it then became Numenor. So the kingdom is Numenor, the island's also called Numenor, but the island's kind of geographical name is Elena. But anyway, they were gifted this land, and the Valar, the kind of gods of Middle-earth, if you will, in very basic terms, they blessed this land with everything they could. So it was incredibly fertile, very easy to defend, it had very pleasant weather, it was like an idyllic island to live on. They also gave those humans that fought with them a longevity, so they have long lives. And most famously of all, their first king, Elros, who is Elrond's twin brother, as the show has now told you. He lived for 550 years, I think. But on average, Numenoreans live about 350 years, something like that. And it slowly declines through history till we get down to Aragorn. I think Aragorn lives for about 250, if memory serves. But again, those absolute specifics I can't recall off the top of my head. But so the Numenoreans are gifted this amazing island where everything is fantastic. They're given long lives. They're given skills of the elves. The elves visit them frequently from Valinor. So there's lots of elven culture intermingled with the Numenorean culture. And they get on very, very well. But as we have seen from the show, we are now at the end of Numenor's history. So the show is bringing us Numenor at the end of their lifespan, their history. So Numenor is only founded in the Second Age, and it exists in the Second Age. And at the point the show is showing us, Numenor has already had about 2,500 years of history. And in that time, very briefly, they've gone from elven worshipping and elven loving people who stand up to the elves or stand with the elves in all things. And now we're at the point where they're starting to question the elves, or rather they already have started. They're questioning the Valar, they're questioning the elves, they ban the elves from the island, they ban elven speech, they change their names into their own language, they no longer worship the elves or uphold them. And so that's where we are. So it was a kingdom, a fantastic kingdom, higher than anything else that humans had. Long lives, idyllic island to live on. They loved the elves, and then over the course of 2,000 years, they now don't. Is the nutshell story of Numenor. But there's so much more to it than that. But very briefly, that's basically what it is.
So the elves haven't done anything wrong to make them hate and be banned from Numenor.
No, they've never gone to war or anything like that. And in their history, Numenor and the elves have fought together a number of times. And that one of the times they fight together, I think the show is possibly not going to show, which is, again, a problem with the condensing of the timeline. They might skip out a fairly significant aspect. But no, they've never been at war. They don't hate each other. Well, they do. But the humans only hate the elves because, almost out of jealousy, really. Elves live forever. Humans don't. And that's the core story behind Numenor. Really, the fundamental feature of Numenor is the humans are jealous of the elves for living forever, and they want that. They think the secret is being kept from them, and they believe they should also be able to live forever.
Okay. You commented when we watched the episode that the Numenor, or no, it's not Numenor because that's an island. The place that we came to, I can't remember if they said.
No, they never gave it its name. It's most likely Romena, but Romena, but they haven't mentioned it in the show.
Okay, you mentioned that it looked like Minas Tirith. Is that because it's built by the same people, or
so that's just subtle foreshadowing. Elendil, who we have met, builds Minas Tirith with his people. He doesn't literally build it on his own, but so that was just some clever foreshadowing, so that people who've seen the films think, "Oh, that looks a lot like Minas Tirith," and then you're like, "Oh, these are the same people." Okay. So that's what that was for.
And the white tree that we see in Numenor, do they only have one white tree, and then that one white tree is then taken to Minas Tirith, or is it like a clipping again that's grown from a little sapling and it's made?
Yeah, so it's a seedling of that tree, and again, I don't want to talk about this too much because the show might cover it, but Isildur plays a big part in the tree, and yes, there's only ever one white tree, and it moves with them to Middle Earth.
Can the white tree die?
Yeah, so the white tree's dead in the Third Age because there's no king.
Oh, and then it blossoms, and then it.
Well, it blossoms in the film, but in truth, there's a tree hiding up in the mountains in Aragorn. Gandalf takes Aragorn up to the mountains, and they find this seedling that's been there. So it's a bit sort of.
That's not as poetic, though.
It's not. It would be better that the tree just burst back to life, but Tolkien doesn't do that.
But they have a little like, oh, the bud on the branch is coming back because the real king is back. He's recognising.
Yeah, I know. So for the film, visually, that works better than Gandalf taking Aragorn up into the mountains and saying, "Oh, here's the tree, by the way," which is what happens.
Well, okay. You answered my other question, which was, do all Numenoreans live for hundreds of years? Yeah,
they do. So, but because of their misdeeds and evils, their lifespan is steadily reducing until we get to the point where, with the Gondorians that we know, obviously in the film, we know Denethor and Boromir and Faramir, they only live for normal human lifespans. And only Aragorn's like faithful people. I was going to say, I don't know how I was going to word it, but Aragorn's people still live forever because they have been very strict on who they procreate with. Whereas the Gondorians mixed with lesser peoples, and that further diluted their blood. Whereas Aragorn's people were very, we will just sleep with other Dunedain. We will not spread our seed. So then they retain their longevity. But even then, they have considerably less long-lived lives than the Numenorians. The Numenorians, I know Elrond was 500 and something, and he was the longest-lived one ever.
Elros,
sorry, yeah. As they go on, it just gets lesser and lesser and lesser. But I think the average is about 350. But again, someone would be able to know that. But for your purposes, if you have the questions, they live longer than normal humans, much longer, like 3 times our lifespan.
So Boromir and Faramir are like a blood relation to those that came from Numenor.
Yeah, but
and that's why they can what do they call it, a regent? No, what do they say, oversee? What do they call it when you oversee?
Well, he's a steward.
Steward, when you oversee the throne. That's why they're allowed to, because they are.
No,
connected.
So Denethor. No. There's so much more to that that would need to be unpicked.
We just won't do that.
Gondorians are descendants of Numenor, but by the time of the films, the Fellowship of the Ring, Two Towers, Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, sorry. By the time of the War of the Ring, as that period is known, their blood is so diluted that they are basically just normal people.
Mm-hmm. Would Aragorn have lived that long, even if he didn't recognise that he was the true king?
Yeah. He lives longer because Like, he's the main character, basically. So Tolkien lets him live a little longer, but he would have lived longer than normal humans anyway.
Okay. Fine. My next question was going to be the family tree of Elendil and Isildur.
Of who, sorry?
Elendil?
Elendil with an R. Mm-hmm. Do you not even have it written on the paper in front of you? Can you not even read your own handwriting?
Elendil.
Elendil. Oh yeah, I know who the Elendil is. I can't answer your questions about Elendil. I'm not really sure who that is.
Elendil and Isildur, their family tree, because obviously in the films we see a clip of Elrond shouting to Isildur.
Yeah, about the ring.
And it's not him. Is it him that keeps the ring? It's not him.
Yeah.
Oh, it's him
So
that
that's
keeps
the
the ring.
same Isildur, yeah.
So he's like, no, this is going to be mine. Okay. Their family tree, because obviously them coming in is like, it's popping up that I recognise that name. I know who that is. Could you give a quick family tree?
Yeah, sure. So Elendil is famously the of the faithful, which the show already showed us. He spoke in Elvish to Galadriel, and he mentioned not everyone hates your kind, and that's because Elendil is the leader of the group of Numenoreans who still think the elves are worthy, and they stay true to the original traditions. Elendil's father, Amandil, was the lord of the faithful, and he was the lord of a city called Andunier. And he sailed to Valinor to try and, well, I won't explain why, but because the show will probably cover it. But Amandil is the last true faithful Numenorian, and he tries to warn the elves of something that might happen. And he's never heard of again, and Elendil takes his place. And I don't think the show's going to bother with Amandil. I don't think he'll be in the show, or Amandil is how I should pronounce it. But I get lazy. So Elendil is the faithful. He's going to be the chief antagonist towards the counselor that we've seen, Pharazôn, who's going to be a super cool character, hopefully. And then the regent. But again, I don't want to hypothesize about what's going to happen with the regent, because it will ruin it for people who want to see what the show does. But yeah, and so that's Elendil. He's the head of the faithful. He's loyal to the elves, and he has 2 children, but the show's given him a third. I'm not too bothered about that personally. I can understand why get another female character in there. But he has 2 sons, Isildur and Anarion, and they are very famous, as you say. Isildur is the one who cuts the ring from Sauron's hand in the Fellowship of the Ring.
And takes it up the mountain.
Takes it up the mountain and then decides to keep it. So that's the same Isildur, yeah. And Elendil is the same Elendil that we see for about a split second in the film, getting smashed by Sauron's mace and dying, and then Isildur charges over and picks up his sword, and I mean that's all a fabrication. Elendil and Gil-galad, they actually just fight and defeat Sauron. They just fight him in hand-to-hand combat, and they beat him, and it costs them their lives, but they kill him. And then Isildur just walks over and cuts the ring off this already dead hand. But the film, I can understand why the film changed what it changed, because that's not very interesting. Yeah. And also, it didn't need in the film. They didn't need to show you who Elendil and Gil-galad were, because they're nothing to do with the Lord of the Rings. That's too much information. So I can understand why they just cut it down to Isildur doing the slicing thing. But yeah, that's Isildur. So they are going to be the chief antagonist towards the Queen that we've already met, and chiefly the other guy, the guy with the beard. He's going to be the main baddie. And
we think they're going to show us who the regent's standing in for.
Yeah, so she went up the tower at the very end of the episode and mentioned her father. Her father is called Tar Palantir, which means far-sighted. Tar is just the regnal. What's the name? Something that goes at the start of a word. Prefix. So all Numenorean kings are called Tar something, and that just denotes it's the king. It'd be like us saying King Charles. You wouldn't just call him Charles, you'd call him King Charles, and there's the same. They call them Tar and then the name. And her father is called Tar Palantir, and he's the last king who is true to the elves. In a time when all of Numenor is turning against the elves and the Valar, Tar Palantir ascends the throne and then thinks, no, we are going down a terrible path. We need to change. And then he dies and something happens that, again, I don't want to spoil the show because that's quite a core concept. But that's who her father is. And she's called Miriel. She will become Tar Miriel.
So so you've answered what the faithful are. That faithful are. They're the people that are
They're the elf-friendly ones.
the elf-friendly ones, and that's why Elendil has an elven name, and that's why he can speak Elvish.
Yeah.
They mention that the regent doesn't really know who Elendil is. And that the other guy that I've forgotten the name of, Farazon, he says who Elendil is and that he's kind of important. Why would he not be higher up? Is he not allowed to be higher up just because he's the faithful? He's not anything important in terms of the whole of Numenor. It's just...
No, so that's just where the show has, again, tinkered with the lore to make possibly the show more... to make you get behind Elendil a little bit more, because at this point, if you take Amandil out of the story, which I think the show is doing, Elendil is the Lord of the Faithful. He would be incredibly well known to the King and Queen, although Farazon's a Chancellor, sorry. And they would know exactly who he is. They would hate each other. They would not be able to stand in the same room. They want to kill Elendil. He's the embodiment of everything they hate. And not only that, if you take away the faithful aspect, Elendil, Numenor only has about 6 cities, I think. Armenelos is the capital in the middle, at the base of a big mountain called the Menel Tarma. And then we've already seen Romena, which is the port in the east. And then there's a few other cities, but the big 3 are Armenelos, Romena, and Andunie on the west. And Elendil is the Lord of Andunie. So even if you took away the faithful aspect from his character, he's like the second in command of the island. So the Amazon have changed quite a bit about his backstory. And I think it's just speculating as a viewer. I think it's because then they want you to get behind Elendil a bit. They want him to be a bit more of an underdog rather than a direct challenger. But that's my thinking at the moment. And
so when he takes Galadriel to their Hall of Law, does he call it? Tower of Law? Hall of Law?
Yeah, something like that.
We think that's might be where they go, is to that.
Yeah, because he mentions in his... I'm sure he says, in my city to the west, we have a Hall of Law and we remember it. And then he mentions it's a quarter-day ride, which I think is about right. Numenor's not massive, and you could get across it quite quickly and easily on a horse. And yeah, I think that's where they go, to Andunie. I don't know the link between... Because then if he is going west... And then he mentions to Isildur later on that Isildur can't go to the west for some reason. And I have no idea what that is about. That just means nothing to me. That's just an Amazon creation. And whatever's going to be on the west shore of Numenor, who knows? It's not written in the lore. It won't be anything lore accurate. It will be something to make Isildur have a bit more of a story.
Okay. Well, you've answered my next question, which was... is Elendil connected to nobility? Kind of.
Yeah, he is. So if the royal family died, Elendil would be, and is, next in line.
Okay, and I'm not going to ask any more questions on going forward with Elendil yet, because I imagine all the stuff with them moving to the west and all that kind of stuff will happen, because that's part of the story of how then the rest of the whole story of Lord of the Rings goes, so that will probably be answered in the show. And then the other one was just is about Isildur, and we kind of discussed it, but he gets whispered to when he's on a ship, and it just says Isildur. I'm sure it just calls to him, but obviously when looking at where Numenor is in comparison to the west, it's really far away from the west, isn't it?
Yeah, so
that would potentially be maybe the west of Numenor.
Maybe? Yeah. It's not going to be Valinor, because he's looking at the island. When he got whispered at, he was looking at the island. So yeah, that just leads into that point I just said about that'll be some sort of made up thing for the show. It won't be anything.
And it won't be anything to do with him going to the east to go to Middle Earth.
No. You can't see Middle Earth from Numenor. You couldn't... Well, and again, that's a point that they're taking away, but you can just about see a famous island called Tol Eressëa, which is... So Valinor, as I mentioned, is an island, but it's not really. It's more of a continent. I mentioned in the first episode. But there is an island off the coast of Valinor called Tol Eressëa. I've always pronounced it Eressëa, but I think it might be Eressëa, but I'm not 100% sure, and I apologise for that. But anyway, there's an island there, and famously you can see that from the western tip of Numenor. So the Numenoreans could see Valinor from where they were, but they could never go there. They were banned from going further west than their own island. And that's part of the reason why they they basically became paranoid that the ban is because the secret of immortality is being withheld from them, and that's why they're banned from going to Valinor. And then over the course of 2,500 years, that paranoia turns into outright rebellion. And that's where we are. That's where we join them now in the story.
And is it Haldor?
Halbrand.
Thanks. Is he a thing?
No.
So, because obviously we've just learnt, spoiler, we've just learnt that he is the heir to the men that betrayed.
Yeah, to the betrayed. I can't remember the house they're from. It's bothering me so much. I don't find humans as interesting, like in the Legendarium. I do like Numenoreans, and I do like dwarves, and I do like the elves, but normal humans I'm not all that bothered by. But I can't remember the names of the house that betrayed the others. I'm sure it begins with a B, but that's not very interesting. But yeah, he apparently is the king of the descendants of humanity that betrayed the elves. And so evidently, given that he's now on Numenor and he's met Galadriel, we're probably going to have something of a redemption arc for him and his people.
When they don't mention that they're still, I assume there's not a kingdom. That must have been like quashed when they betrayed.
Well, they didn't even have a kingdom when they betrayed. They were just a group of people. They were called the Easterlings at that time because they came from the east. But then all humans came from the east. But they came after. So when the elves awoke, and then they made it to Beleriand, and then all the things happened in Beleriand with the elves, and then the humans came. The humans arrived first. Or not before the elves, but the first humans that arrived were friendly to the elves, and they integrated into Beleriand. They founded their own realms and kingdoms and things like that. And then this other group of humans came later, and that's why they were then called the Easterlings, which is a bit silly because all humans came from the east, so they should all be Easterlings. But the second group that came were called Easterlings because they came after the first humans. And then at that point, the humans had been there for so many years that they didn't really have a link back to their ancestors arriving from the east. So these newcomers coming from the east, it made sense to call them Easterlings. But they didn't really have like a set kingdom. And if they had something in Middle-earth, we just didn't know about it. And it's in that vagueness at the end of that sentence I just said that the show operates. So Middle-earth in the First Age, we know absolutely nothing about. There might have been one massive human kingdom for all we know, but Tolkien never wrote about it. And it's because of that Tolkien never wrote about it that the show is operating. And that's where Halbrand's kingdom is coming from and his people. So yeah, it's playing on the truth that there were humans all over Middle-earth. We know that much because they spread out when they first awoke. But we don't know then what happened to them. And then the show is making up its own story for that part. What did happen to them? And Halbrand being a king of some random kingdom is Amazon's plan.
Well, I mean, there has to be something that goes on with that area because obviously that's where it's all happening right now, isn't it? All those...
Well, yeah, it's Mordor, isn't it? So
yeah.
The show is covering the founding of Mordor. The orcs are claiming it as we speak, and we've just met Adar, who hopefully won't be Sauron, but we just don't know. And that's where we are. We're in the founding of Mordor is what the show's covering.
And so Mordor, this is completely slightly off topic, but Mordor is kind of C-shaped looking. We have a map just here, but it's kind of C-shaped, whereas in comparison to all the other mountain ranges, it's not doesn't look natural. Because does it have that appearance now? Yes.
Yeah.
And so
Sauron didn't make it that super useful defensive site.
Someone did.
Well, we're going
way off topic,
way too in depth. But Middle-earth isn't created in the natural sense, so that's why the mountain ranges don't look natural, because it was sung into creation by all-powerful beings, and they're what they thought it would look like was what it became. And Morgoth, the chief enemy of the whole series, he became discord in that song. So everyone else was singing in unison. They're all chanting together. They're all on key, and they're all singing the same notes. And then Morgoth strolls in and starts doing what he wants because he wants to shape it in his image. And then they battle in song against one another, and that creates this sort of weird, wacky, bizarre geography which doesn't make any sense.
And so Morgoth has always been a baddie.
But he's a very complicated character. He wants to rule the world himself, and that's his goal. Sauron is evil. Sauron comes to evil through ambition, so he's not purely evil either. He wants to control and dominate as well. Sauron wants to bring like an order to the world. He's super ordered. And so he wants to rule it to try and better people's lives. And then over the years that becomes, now actually sod that, I just want to rule. Whereas Morgoth from the beginning was like, I like this thing we've created, I think I'll rule it. And so he was not like strictly evil. He just wants things. So he wants the world to start with, and he wants the elves to worship him, and then he wants the Silmarils, and that creates the Silmarillion storyline. And he just wants power, basically. So he's evil in the sense that he wants to rule. But he's not like pure. He's not like literally Tolkien just decided I need a baddie, so he's going to be evil for the sake of evil. He wanted to rule the world. He wanted to control it, which a lot of people do. And particularly when you actually helped create it, like you can sort of understand why he might think, actually, I do want to rule this. But yeah, so he's been bad since the beginning. But Morgoth won't come into the story again because, again, they don't have the rights for him. So they've mentioned him once. Everyone now knows that there's a bigger baddie than Sauron, but we now know that he's gone as well. So,
Okay.
And that's where we are.
Well, they were all my questions for episode 3, because I think most of the other questions that I had, I think will probably be answered in the actual show. So I didn't really want to make this a speculation on what will happen and who people are and our opinions on different characters.
Yeah, no, I don't want to. I really didn't want this to just be like, this is what we liked and hated about Rings of Power, because in the current climate and with the types of people that will likely watch this video, you watching along, it's just going to create such carnage, and I can't be bothered with it anymore. I'm too long in the tooth for that now. So I just wanted to talk about what the fill in the gaps that the show doesn't cover, and just talk about Lord of the Rings with the show as a sort of anchor for that discussion. And hopefully you have enjoyed this episode similarly to the first, and hopefully it might have told you something you didn't know, or it's just enjoyable to talk about the show without crapping all over it or saying it's the best show in existence, because neither of those is correct. Everything is great. So hopefully you've enjoyed. But if you have questions from episode 3, write them in the comments down below and I'll get around to answering them. And I'd also would love to hear your speculation as well on the show. I don't mind that. If you are here just to tell us how terrible the show is, I probably won't read your comment. But beyond that, hopefully you've enjoyed this episode. Do you have anything else to add?
If there are any questions that people put down below that Ed answers, and they're ones that we think other people might want to know, then I will pick them out and I'll ask them in the next episode, and then we'll give the actual answer again, just in case people don't read all the comments. But that won't be for every single one. It will be if there's like a main theme, it will be that kind of.
Yeah, so if there's some big questions that are worth discussing, we'll pick them out, and then at the start of next episode we'll just do a quick recap on the questions of this one. Of your questions of this episode, yeah. And hopefully moving forward, the episodes will come out on the Monday after the show comes out on the Friday, so we've got the weekend to think of the questions and then record it. Okay, so for now, thank you very much for watching, if indeed you have, and until we speak again, Navair na den perimad melonin, and farewell.